After such a wonderful moment, I now request Ms. Aneetha Satish, who is going to be in conversation with Namita and guide us through her journey of this new book and its themes. I request Yamini Kundedkar to formally introduce our esteemed author. Once again, it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you the author of the book, Namita Devidayal. Namita is an eminent journalist and a classically trained vocalist whose life beautifully bridges the world of rigorous reporting with the deep soul of Indian arts. Namita serves as a senior journalist for the Times of India, wielding a pen as insightful as it is elegant. A proud graduate of Princeton University, her intellectual curiosity and lyrical sensitivity infuse her acclaimed body of work. She is the celebrated author of the award-winning memoir, The Music Room, a winner of the 2008 Vodafone Crossword Popular Book Award. A book which delves into the intriguing and enigmatic world of the Jaipur Gharana of Hindustani classical music, featuring legendary figures like Alladia Khan, Kesarbai Kerkar, and her own guru, Dhondutai Kulkarni. Her literary repertoire also includes the engaging novel Aftertaste and compelling biography The Sixth String of Vilayat Khan, which recreates the extraordinary life of the sitar maestro. Her most recent and highly discussed work is Tangerine, How to Read the Upanishads Without Giving Up Coffee. It chronicles her midlife journey into Hindu philosophy with accessibility, humor, and a non-dogmatic spirit. The book blends memoir, music, and philosophy, reflecting her own deep engagement and culture. Having also served as the co-director of the Times Lit Fest, Namita Devidayal is a true cultural synthesist, a writer whose work is as richly steeped in the classical traditions of India as it is attuned to the pulse of modern life. Ladies and gentlemen, the sweet and soft-spoken Namita Devidayal. To moderate this interesting session, we have Aneetha Satish, a postgraduate degree. She holds a postgraduate degree in management studies. Her expertise in the field of psychology is demonstrated through her practice of rational emotive behavior therapy and therapeutic crisis intervention. Complementing her professional skills, she holds a diploma in mysticism and maintains a deep spiritual inclination. Aneetha is also an enthusiast of dancing and reading. Her core philosophy centers on continuous improvement. Do your best today and do it better tomorrow. Over to you, ladies. Thank you.
I think the tone was set when Bachi said that you take things seriously but not yourself. So we are going ahead with the same theme. In this particular book, through your own experience, you touch upon themes of identity, suffering, impermanence, and spirituality. So I want to know, do you see comedy even in dire situations?
Absolutely. I think that, this is something that the idea of spirituality conjures up something very serious and serene and something away from like day-to-day life, etc. And what I got from my learnings and, from my teacher and from what I've read is that it's absolutely not different from real life. You essentially, what you do when you call yourself, a spiritually inclined person, is that you just start viewing the world and yourself differently. Now, I do tend to laugh through a lot of things in life, so how can that go away? In fact, I think that the whole idea of spirituality is to eventually make you not take yourself that seriously, because you realize that there's something much vaster than you. So that is so liberating, and of course it sort of lightens you up and allows you to be humorous about a lot of things which otherwise would kind of pull one down, because self-absorption does that, right?
True that. So, when you quote Ajmer Sharif saying music is an offering in temples and churches and mausoleums, yet we go to these places for its silence. So what is your take on that?
Oh, I think that silence is such a huge part of music. So that's a very important thing to remember. I think that in our lives, what we don't acknowledge enough is the rest and repose. So, now, of course, with the kind of like Insta sound bites about health and all that, we're learning about so many different little things, like how sleep is so important and how, the resting place is so important, even in active life. But for sure, silence is a part of music. And so I think what I had quoted was this beautiful thing, since maybe you all haven't read the book. I had once gone to Ajmer Sharif, and there was this Kawal sitting over there, and I asked him, why is it that every place of worship, whether it's a gurdwara, a church, a dargah, temple, has some form of music as an offering? I mean, it's like almost uniformly the case. And he said something that has just stayed with me. He said that, even the bell that you kind of like have that, you hit a bell and the resonance that comes from that is musical. He said that if a murderer is about to go and commit an act of murder, and he hears that bell sound, he will involuntarily stop and pause just for those few seconds.
Wow.
That is an extraordinary idea, because I guess what it means to me is that there's a part of something within each and every one of us that has a kind of a visceral and involuntary connection with something much larger. And music is like a shortcut to the divine, because it's such a it comes from right within. I mean, that's what my teacher used to always say. And so I think what he was trying to say was something very profound, and silence is built into music.
Yes,
True that. Yeah.
Because after every raga, that pause is when it resonates. So it makes the difference. This book has a lot of references to your music teacher Dhondu Tai, also to Masterji Dayashankar Dubeji, your Saturday dates with him. So do you think these early lessons is a necessity now when everything is available at the click of a button?
I really do. And I don't know how we're going to kind of navigate that given the world and the sort of button culture and the thing about our Guru Shishya Parampara is that it's not just a quaint traditional device that was used in India. It has very, very important significance. And because I experienced it in the music sense, and then again in learning the Hindu scriptures that I was learning, I'll tell you what that is and how it cannot really be replicated. We'll always lose something. I think one of the biggest aspects of, say, studying the scriptures and understanding what is in them is a kind of a respect for the intangible. And when I connected that with my musical training, I could see that, even when you're learning a rag, it's like how you get to a note, the particular amount of pause in the note before, that what I call the penumbra of things that happen before you get to the actual thing, is as important. And there is no way you can learn that in a book or through a video class or whatever. It has to be kind of like unfurled in a very gentle, gradual, explanatory way. Similarly, I had earlier also picked up the Bhagavad Gita to read, as we all have. My grandfather had given me a copy, etc. There is no way that I can understand that without a teacher, because it is so counterintuitive to everything that we know as, in the way we've been raised as like individual people, believing in the individual self, whereas this is talking about something much vaster. So how are you going to get to that without a teacher breaking down your earlier conditioning, you're dismantling all the ideas you had about yourself and the universe? Similarly, just as my music teacher would, how are you going to be able to learn something like getting to a note requires all those micro notes like I mean, how are you going to explain all those notes through a textbook without a teacher kind of like helping you, teaching you that small little like what we call the gamak, So those are things that you do need. It's an oral tradition for a reason, because it's built on the nuance of what is being taught, and it's so different from what is the kind of like version of life or that art form that we know of. So that's my long
It
answer.
reminds me, you mentioned about, is it a concert where your teacher took about 20 minutes just trying to fine tune the tanpura, and you were getting restless, and you thought the audience was getting restless. And once she started, it was that 5 minutes of bliss, and all other instruments fell in tune.
Yeah, so there's this word in Hindi which I've never found a proper definition for in English, but there are two very fine translators sitting here, so I'm going to ask them. And that word is therav. And that word therav is not just about being slow, it's about the idea of pause, the idea of being able to, slow down to get to something else. And I have talked about this very beautiful anecdote where this art historian called B.N. Goswami um, was helping us to look at these different artworks, and he talked about the need to pause and see something. And, and the example he used was of this painting where there was a tree and there were these white flowers falling down from the tree, and it looked beautiful as white flowers falling down from a tree. And then he invited us to look closely and pause. And when we looked closely and paused, we saw that the white flowers actually formed Krishna's form. And that to me is a metaphor for so much more, right? It's the idea that unless you're kind of like willing to invest that time, which seems to be meaningless, but it's actually not. So if it takes 20 minutes to tune a tanpura and get it just right, there's a reason for it. And so I think it's the idea of pause, which honestly I have gotten very comfortable with, and perhaps it's also with age. And I really and genuinely feel that this kind of like hyper productivity and running from here to there and trying to like gather all this knowledge or information, I think not knowledge but information, is just not adding up to much. And I hope that people kind of recognize that, because clearly social media enables that kind of hunger to just gather things without any assimilation. And the idea of assimilation is the most important like conduit to, from where I think information becomes knowledge, becomes wisdom.
It reminds me of what Devdutt mentioned yesterday about being the bakasur, where we're just greedy and we're eating and we are eating and we are eating. So it's the ambition, it is the need for something, we are not stopping. So the bhog is never ending. And that is why our karma leads to all of the things that is going to come back to us. So I feel this bakasur has to stop somewhere. Which reminds me that I know you are a coffee lover, and you are not ready to stop because the tagline says that. So how did you come up with this title?
Chat GPT. I'm going to be honest. So basically, I'll tell you how it happened. Tangerine was my idea because I was trying to subvert the idea of saffron, because I feel like saffron has been taken away from us, and I appreciate that. So it's basically I feel so bad because saffron has now come to be associated with politics and with a certain kind of very, aggressive politics in the context of Hinduism. And I was actually getting more and more disturbed by this, even though I consider myself a true-blooded South Bombay apolitical person, whatever that means. But I was really finding it very hurtful that a faith that is so universalist, so liberal, so kind of like nourishing for a person, who's just trying to become a better version of themselves, had just been completely appropriated by a political party. I'm not going to go too much into this because, but the point is that Tangerine was like a kind of a way of saying this is not saffron, but from a bookseller's point of view, and when the booksellers came into the picture and the publishers came into the picture, they were like, listen, what is Tangerine about? If we're going to go out to bookstores and sell this to, which bookshelf will this fall under? What does it come under? What is it about? Is it a painting book? Is it about color? So they said you'll have to have a tagline which in some way talks about either Hinduism or the Upanishads or something. And I was like, oh God, but I don't want it to sound like a heavy Hindu book. So I went into ChatGPT and I was like, we need to bring in this, and we also need to make it a little irreverent and a little light and a little witty. And they came up with these amazing titles, and I was like, wow, I mean, there is a place for AI in the world if you know how to prompt it.
True. So Tangerine is bittersweet. In that way, we'll come back to what the book is about, Vedant philosophy. Basically, there is a Prashnatrayi where you have the Upanishads, you have the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutras. And Bhagavad Gita, mostly all of us, like you mentioned, have read it. Then they think Upanishads is for the serious readers, and of course Brahma Sutras is after that. So do you think Upanishads is for the serious reading?
It's so not. That's the big thing for me. That I mean, I had heard of the Upanishads and I had some abstract idea of what they were about, but in a very, very it was too esoteric, because that's the idea. And when I started learning with this teacher and she broke down the different Upanishads for us, I could not believe how actually accessible and beautiful they are from so many points of view. So as a writer, I find them very extraordinary works of literature, because they use the kind of imagery and metaphors that are just so powerful, mostly drawn from nature. They're told in a very interesting way as dialogue. So each Upanishad is a dialogue between, say, a father and a son, or a husband and the wife, or a teacher and a student. And so it's actually kind of like starts with a very easy, accessible entry point, which is a dialogue between two, very real people. And then, I mean, once you understand something of the central idea, it is so incredibly life-altering, which is that, you are something much bigger than who you think you are. So from a purely psychology point of view, which it just helps you recede your anxieties, which are otherwise rooted in your version of yourself, which is so small and limited and, a kind of a construct based on the database of conditioning that we have in our lives. And the minute you take that out, you kind of engage with the world in a very different way. I mean, it's really scary for me to try and explain what is in the Upanishads, but that's my understanding, essentially, that, it's something which helps you understand that you're part of a very vast and interconnected universe. So there's ecology, there's psychology, there is physics, quantum physics at least, and there's a sense of, literary. So for me, this was like a kind of a complete knowledge, which I hadn't really found anywhere else, and so I was actually just, in this book, I talk about how it's just regrettable that living in India, being a Hindu, and having some access to literature, I had never been exposed to these. I was actually kind of like, wow, this is just something unbelievable. And I wanted, therefore, to share some of my learnings of these texts and bring out their original essence and their universalism in a very chatty way. So as Atul said, he was actually, when he first picked up this book, he found it so unusual because it was probably very light and chatty compared to my earlier books, but I did that very consciously. I wanted to kind of like bring something that was like up there and esoteric, etc., and just say that, hey, this is part of daily life, let's share it. And also this book was initially actually a letter to my son, because my son was getting really weirded out by my little excursions into, Hinduism, and he's like, is my mom turning like into a weirdo right-wing person or whatever? And so I started this as a letter to him to say that, listen, this is actually about life. This is about all of us. This is about how you live. This is about how to be a more evolved, thoughtful person who understands, lateral thinking, backstories, etc., right? Because you're not just that individual at that particular time in this world. There's always antecedents and precedents and a future. So I wrote this in that way because it was a letter to him. And then I left that kind of, that style, because I said, I mean, I'm also a little bored with that whole ponderous approach to writing. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer to.
That's okay. Yeah. See, basically, all the 10 Upanishads talk of a Brahman, Atma, and Moksha. Like you mentioned, it's also a dialogue. Each of the Upanishads is a dialogue. So, do you think we should read all of them, or one is enough?
I think that, it's like everybody has different levels of engagement with anything that they're doing. Like, I know people who will go and learn music for 1 or 2 years, learn maybe 3 rags and be comfortable with that, and then move on to light music. So I think that's a very personal sort of prerogative. And for me, I'm like, I'm really just drawn so much to it that I want more and more and more, because I find these texts are so layered that it's like every time you read it, you get something more out of it, depending on where you are in your life at that time. Because it's like almost like looking at these texts are not prescriptive, right? So they're like a kind of a scaffolding of knowledge, I would put it that way, where when you enter, depending on where you are, you absorb that much more of that scaffolding. And so it's a very exciting process, because you can read an abridged version of something, you can go into the actual text. I mean, my goal, I don't know if I'll ever achieve it, but is to actually maybe learn Sanskrit and get into it, because that whole way of approaching them is a whole different thing, because the language itself allows you to engage with the texts, right? So, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that.
Which reminds me what our Swaminiji says, that it is, we are so much into the exterior world, but pehle khud ko to jano. And that is why the Upanishads have different perspectives. Like you said, it's a scaffold. You take what you want. So each Upanishad, though it talks of the same thing, it is how you would like it to be served. So that is why it's a very interesting thing. And I'm glad you put up this subject out there, because the book itself is light, but it gives you a taste of what is going to come if you want to learn. Your sister mentioned, why can't you be more normal? So what do you want to say to that?
So basically, when I first started these studies, I know that a lot of people in my family and friend circle, and I think, my colleagues, Bachi, all of them were definitely weirded out. Like, they were definitely like, what's going on over here? Also because the climate in India has become, a certain kind of Hindu narrative has come out to the fore. So there was a lot of, skepticism, sense of like, what's up with, why can't you just like carry on with life and, be a journalist, and what is the need and what is the relevance? And I think that was me 15 years ago. So I would have been the one saying, hey, why can't you be a little more normal? So it's really one of those things where I think until you step into that step well and get a jhalak of it and see and feel a sense of, why this matters to you, it's impossible to try and convey that. And luckily, what happened over the years was that everybody saw that nothing in my life had changed. I was doing exactly the same thing, talking nonsense every once in a while, being this person who dressed the same, worked the same, had the same friends, and that is the point. And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of these new age gurus who do tend to project this kind of idea that once you're in that world, you're going to have to be a little bit more like wear white and be a little bit like saffron clad, or, talk a certain way and have that slightly supercilious thing going on. And that is just complete bullshit. And so for me, I was just like really pleased to be able to, I would put it this way, it's like putting on a new set of lenses. So you're exactly the same person, but I don't know how many of you have read The Wizard of Oz, but everything turns green because of your lenses.
Do that.
So I find myself just putting on a fresh pair of lenses where I am seeing things a little differently. I know it sounds weird, but I do feel like I've got a little more insight into why things happen. Why things happen in a way that you don't expect them to. Why logic is such a limited way of approaching the world, because there's so many inexplicable things that are happening all the time at a geopolitical level, at a personal level, at a and so I think this just gave me many more answers that were beyond the pale of like the obvious. And so that normal thing happened because I think initially the whole way in which all these things are presented do give all kinds of views. There's and I think my sisters are just sort of people who are like perhaps just products of an English speaking education where their worldview is limited by a certain kind of, world.
Hopefully to the new normal. I would like you to read something from your book. No, I would leave it to you. I have some favorite passages, but I'd like you to read yours.
So this is a bit which talks about why I even entered this terrain, why I decided to sort of go to that one class in Rishikesh to see what it was all about. The perfect world that I had curated around me was not working the way I had thought it would. For a while, I felt like I was living the anxiety dream where you are endlessly late for an exam. I began to realize that I had to repair something within, not just rely on external circumstances and insidious reward systems. I started doing yoga regularly, I went for therapy, tentatively, grudgingly, I turned to various self help practices, all of which I had once smugly thought were not for me. Then one of my friends went online and found me an Ayurvedic center overlooking the vast and calming Mulshi Lake, a few hours' drive from Mumbai. This was going to be my Walden Pond. I went there for 2 weeks to detox mind and body, to stare at the water and meditate on falling leaves and do little else. Doing is so often a distraction from being. It was the first time I was giving my brain a short sabbatical from its habitual egocentric excursions, going round and round without getting anywhere new. It was also the first time I was taking a different route, trusting something beyond the rational mind, something that would help me stop feeling low. I did not know then that this lingering thread of sadness would become an inflection point. It sent me looking for answers. The slow burn of gloom helped me realize that my intellect or Ivy League education or wealth or relationships may not always help me control the outcomes. Sorrow, untimely death, the many confounding situations that contradict everything you assume to be true. Nothing I possessed helped me understand all this. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do even highly successful people feel an emptiness, a sudden sense of terror? How is it that we all know that death is inevitable, but live our lives as if it will never happen? What are those unseen factors that drive all things, including what some call coincidences and others call miracles? These are questions that people have been asking for millennia. Now, I too wanted some answers.
I like that Bakasur. I would like one more passage now. You read it so beautifully. One more last.
Okay, so this is a passage from the end. So that was how I kind of like took my plunge into the river, so to speak. And this is how I would describe where I am now. The kaleidoscope moves. Same pixels, different picture. It's like discovering music in what you thought was silence. You listen with your eyes and see with your ears. You suddenly pay attention to your breath, to the wind, to the sound of crickets, and to the unstruck note. You roll into the contemplative mind. I feel like I'm molting, peeling off the pleasant patina that had long been my sheath against myself. I now don't want to be fenced in by any of my identities. I am all of them, and yet they don't define me. I remember taking a deep breath and changing my Instagram bio to I am that, although fully aware that it might mystify and baffle many who knew me, maybe even elicit a sneer or two. Well, hello again. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name. It's like the numbered lenses the optometrist places on your trial glasses that suddenly make you see the letters clearly. These wisdom tinted lenses have taken me beyond my seeing eyes into understanding the subterranean mysteries of life, that hidden language with which ants communicate with one another, and the not really blue sky spreads across the world. The lenses are also panoramic. They help me see not just the waves that appear in my line of vision, they give me a sense of the ocean that contains all waves, big, small, bad, good, past, present, future. You can keep reading, but
Thank you. This book is filled with one-liners, and while you were ending it, I remembered one line which said, "How do rivers know where the ocean is?" And they flow back to the ocean. So, for all in the audience who haven't yet picked up the copies, do that. I assure you, it's a very, very interesting read. Do you want to take any questions from the audience?
sure.
Anybody wants to ask any questions?
If I can know, you said one day you went to Rishikesh and then that changed your life. So what exactly happened there?
Oh, so I basically came across a teacher who, like me, had studied in the US, was an economist with the UN. And then one day she saw this poster of uh, a person in an orange saffron, tangerine robe. And the line under it said, "Do you know who you really are?" Which is such a weird question for anyone to ask as far as like what they're going to be talking about. But she was intrigued by it and she went and she then got completely smitten. And this person then went and did a 3.5 year kind of deep study of all these texts and learned all the relevant things. And it was really like the equivalent of a PhD. And so what I loved about this teacher was that she taught us these scriptures in a way that was so sort of rigorous and without any interpretations and without any kind of added stuff. And it was also, she was just very modern and like, I didn't feel in any way that if you met her outside of the class, she was just this person who you could go out and have dinner and a glass of wine with or whatever. So I loved that. I love the fact that these binaries that we create in our heads are not necessary. That you can be this person and then also be a whole other person. It sort of like ties into what Bachi said, which is, take your work seriously, but not yourself. So you don't have to fit into this role. And I think that the way she taught and the way she kind of lived just appealed to me. And that became that point where I was like, okay, I can also just be someone who gets drawn to the teachings, but I don't have to change anything in my sort of outward life. So that was what happened, that I got this really wonderful teacher over there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Since you have been learning music for such a long time, how has music played a part in your journey through it? Because संगीत भी एक सेवा ही है और it is a journey inwards in a way. And I think these go parallelly. So
Absolutely. So that was a very beautiful thing when I started connecting the dots between our traditional art forms and the the entire essence of them, like the way in which they're taught, the fact that they're structured in a way that is essentially, I would suggest, drawn from our philosophy, or rather Hindu philosophy, which is that everything is cyclical. So suddenly I started realizing that the reason that even in Hindustani classical music, the structure is cyclical, you come back to the sum. That very idea of, non-linear thinking, the idea that, it's essentially all moving in this manner, and you're just a small part in that reel, is very powerful actually. So I started making all these connections, which my teacher had never really explicitly said to me. But then I started like remembering a lot of the things. Even the idea of authorlessness is something that really appealed to me. In pure Hindustani classical music is so abstract. It's just akar. There's no words. And that is again the very idea of how words are limited in the end. Words will not convey beyond a certain point. It's like don't miss the map for the territory, right? So, don't mistake the map for the territory. So these very ideas, the ideology within Indian classical music suddenly started making even more sense. This idea of authorlessness has really appealed to me, perhaps because we're all so obsessed with our bylines and our names and all that, because that's what we are as journalists, as authors, etc. And the hubris that comes with that can be actually very disturbing, right? Because when you think of how we don't know who wrote the rags. We don't know who even wrote these incredible scriptures that have come down in a like reasonably intact form over centuries. The fact that they're authorless is something, it just like makes you rethink all the ideas of owning knowledge and owning, even what plagiarism is. All these ideas I was suddenly questioning, and the music and the philosophy really started reflecting one another and more, so I think that's what happened.
That's the last question, Milind.
In fact, you mentioned something about what I was going to ask you about the bylines thing. You are into active journalism even today. So we are stuck up with the deadlines, with our bylines. We have an obsession for bylines, I would say. But then this is all a kind of shallow writing that we do, day in, day out. The book is about deep thinking about life and all those things. So how did you really compartmentalize yourself while you wrote this book?
It's actually the easiest thing to do, when you start looking at yourself as a person who has to just play different roles in life. You just play each one with incredible integrity without getting entangled in any one of them. And so for me, this, it's like the music room had become that place of retreat for me, where it wasn't necessarily a physical room. It was like something that I kind of like felt like I would go back into that and be able to sing, and then nothing outside really mattered, because I was never a performing artist, right? It just became something I would sing for myself in the mornings and all that. So similarly, this has become a place of retreat for me, where I could be playing, like anything. I could be playing the role of a mother, I could be playing the role of a journalist, I could be playing the role of whatever, but I don't get too caught in anything. I find myself not wanting to be stuck in that role beyond the work that it requires me to do. And it's so liberating, because it's like you're kind of then engaging with yourself in a very different, lighter way. Does that make sense? I don't know. Like, you become a sort of a person who wants to understand the self more, rather than make yourself attached to any one of these labels.
I wanted to say the same. You get detached with things, the day-to-day things, when you write a book.
Yeah, detached is a very complicated word, because it's not like you're completely detached. It's a kind of a detached attachment. So it's very much within a certain context, and then when you move out of that context, it's like, how, I don't know how many people pray in the morning, but like when I sit in front of them, like I light that agarbatti, I'm not really anything except that person who's just praying for like some kind of alignment, right? Like there's nothing else. I'm not saying, I'm a journalist and I'm a this one and I'm a that one. I'm just sitting there with humility and So I think that has become a more important place for me to keep retreating into. And I think that so it's really not about being one or the other.
Thank you.
Best feature story of yours.
Next feature story. God, you're sounding like my boss.
We both are. He's ex-colleague and you're ex-photographer.
I know. I'm working on a very interesting story about longevity and how that's going to be a new area that we all have to engage with, where it's going to be a prolonged and active kind of a space of living. So I'm working on that.
You call yourself an accidental pilgrim. So I would say thank you for taking us along with you on that pilgrimage. So from my soul to your soul, namaste.
Thank you, Ms. Namita Devidayal, for sharing with us the journey of your book, Tangerine. It was a privilege for all of us at the Thane Lit Fest to be part of this special launch. Gratitude to Ms. Aneetha Satish for moderating the conversation so insightfully. I'd like to call upon Dr. Vijay Kulkarni, Dr. Sujata Jadhav, President Samir Limaye, Convener Atul Bide, to present a small token of our gratitude. Friends, The Accidental Pilgrim Tangerine is available at Bargain Book Hut. Please do visit the Author's Corner and can catch up for special stories and special moments with Namita Devidayal.
Yeah, I take this as a opportunity once upon a time on this stage, not once in a lifetime because I met you previously, and I had met her when she gave information about her book on Ustad Vilayat Khan in a closed group. You will recall that. But anyway, I just want to, before I give you this, I want to ask you a very funny question. Does your book give a tangy taste to coffee? Anyway, we'll experience that. So, meeting you. It was a great opportunity for every one of us attending.